Hello, welcome to Enchantment of Eternity. Thank you for joining us on this very solemn day where the Bell Riots are beginning in San Francisco. But we have future knowledge. We know that they will end in 2 days with Cisco faking his death, but pretending like Gabriel Bell really died. Anyway, thanks for joining us. So funky that as soon as I saw that the day, I was like a year ago, I saw, hey, wait a second, the day the past tense takes place is coming up next year. I'm going to make sure I got to do a live stream on that day. But it takes place over 6 days, I think. It's from August 30th to September 3rd. So,
They show up on the 30th,
yes.
and then it takes a couple days. The riots start the morning of the 1st, and then it
First.
ends on the 3rd. Yeah, so
Oh, was it the morning of the first, not the evening? Okay.
I think it was early morning of the 1st, if I remember correctly.
Okay, and then it ends on the third. Yeah, because I saw different people were celebrating it at different days. I saw a lot of posts on the 30th, but I was like, and some people might do the third. They're all valid. Anyway, let me introduce my special guest, Darrin. Darrin from D's Reviews. Thanks so much for joining.
Oh, thanks, Mark. I'm excited to jump in. As any opportunity to talk Star Trek and such, I'm usually there. And we get to actually have kind of a real interesting temporal discussion today, which I think is just makes this episode so apt compared to the reality of what we're actually in.
Yeah, so we are going to be comparing what the depiction of 2024. So this isn't going to be a flat out review of the episodes, mainly comparing the depiction of 2024 in that episode made in 1994, aired in 1995. We're going to be comparing that to what current day is. And so, because of that, we will later on get into some political commentating and stuff like that. Which, who would have thunk it on a Star Trek episode? But so if that bothers you, then I don't really know why you watch Star Trek videos to begin with. But if it bothers you, you can, bow out. But it's funny because I was reading a quote from Ira Stephen Bear, the showrunner who wrote this episode, or co-wrote it, I should say more technically. But he was talking about how this episode in the years have gotten backlash for being too preachy. Certain Star Trek episodes get backlash for being too preachy, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I should have portrayed the positive aspects of a concentration camp."
Not to put too fine a point on it, but yeah. I always laugh when people get, talk about again the what is Star Trek getting woke? I mean, first of all, I hate anybody who uses that term should not be using it because they don't know what the heck they're talking about.
Yeah.
But the idea is like, when did this get political? When did it get this thing? And I'm like, since the beginning, I don't even understand. I mean, you can still have half a slew of original episodes that were just like around racism and war and all of these things. But that's just how Roddenberry really wanted to deal with that, future is how does it reflect onto our modern day? And the fact that we can have an episode that, gets so preachy, making a prediction on our future of like, this isn't going to be horrible. And then we get to our reality now and we're like, this looks a little too close to what, okay, the computers are slightly different, but there's way too many similarities. And, that's not politics, man. That's a wake-up call. That's history smacking you upside the head going, come on.
Yeah, a funny comparison I'd like to make is Predator 2, which came out and it was made in 89. It came out in 90. And it was taking place in 97. And so at this time in the late 80s, early 90s, LA was featuring the biggest like gang wars and crime wave. And so this movie predicted things were going to get much, much worse. So the the vision of LA they portrayed in 97 was a complete war zone. It was chaotic. But in real life, the crime actually went down and the gang situation actually got a bit less terrible. So they were actually very bad at predicting the future, but they were predicting the worst case scenario. But this episode actually wasn't off. they actually did. They actually did a pretty good job of predicting the future.
Yeah, sadly, Predator 2 did miss out that the apex of gang warfare would not be Jamaican. Would not be led by the Jamaican gangs. That's really, that was their mistake. That was their error. But yeah, I mean, again, it's just one of those things where it's like, and you're thinking at the time, we're doing a story for 30 years in the future. You can sort of see the ideas. I mean, you are having homeless situations in there. You've got the AIDS crisis had just kind of gone through. You had sort of the gang types of idea. We're coming up on the whole Rodney King LA riots is about to sort of all come down shortly. Or no, this is 95. So yeah, this had happened just before.
Oh, it was before. Oh, for some reason I was thinking the riots were before the episode.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is they had happened just before. So we're dealing with a lot of these social context issues, and and that was kind of like the big idea at the time. How do you deal with this type of thing? And yeah.
So they said the inspiration for this episode was Robert Hewitt Wolf, who was the other co-writer of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
Took a trip to, I think, Santa Monica on the beach and noticed that there was all these tourists around taking pictures, and there was homeless people scattered among the beach, and the tourists would just step over them and like pretend that they're not even there. And he thought that felt very surreal, so wanted to do that. Inspired this whole storyline.
Yeah, I think it was concentration camps is just what sort of popped into him. That's what we're gonna do. That's the angle that we're gonna take on this one. And it's and it is kind of a logical next step. So if you have all of this population, what is it that you do with them? Oh, here's kind of a perfect dark thing. What if you basically escape from New York, the homeless population, and shove them all into these little barricaded areas, and then they would just be pushed away. It'd be in the middle of town. So if you needed their workforce, you could probably pull them up. That resource was there, but it was an easy way it was an easy carpet to sweep everything under.
Oh, yeah. So, but anyway, before we get too much in that, I wanted to start with a fun fact about this episode, where the episode title kind of has a double meaning, because it's not just about, you think past tense, they travel back to the past. But the other meaning that most people might not be aware of is that Cisco and Bashir are in a sort of, concentration camp everywhere, where there's the sanctuary district, and there's people camped out all over the streets. And so when Bashir and Cisco are walking down the street, they're walking past tents.
That is an excellent horrible bad joke. It kind of worked for the timing of Star Trek.
Boom.
Very nice.
But yeah, I want to talk a bit about some of the technology. You mentioned the computers there, and to me, this is the thing that they gotten wrong the most, because you see these things, they're freaking huge and like clunky, and I guess that's what they looked like in the 90s. So, but they didn't. Like, it's funny how whenever you get sci-fi predicting the not too distant future, how some things they predict too much, like going a bit too far, and other things like not enough. Like, prime example of this is in the original series episode pilot, The Cage. They were using paper in a pad.
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting, is I think technology is the hardest thing to do any kind of prediction of where things are going to go versus, kind of social issues, which tend to be a little bit more of a universal type of thing. It's also funny that we are actually more next generation in with our iPads and stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
To do things than we were here, which You know, if you want to flash back, the original series had the communicators, and by the time that we have DS9, we're actually doing cell phones that look like communicators. And that's only 30 years later. It's kind of funny for them to not think that 30 years later we're going to be using the technology they're already,
Yeah.
playing with on the show.
Well, I think the problem for them there is that if they used gave them like iPads, it would look too much like
Well,
the 24th century, and so they got to
yes,
differentiate it.
of course, yeah. And again, that is the kind of the error and problem you have with this predictive sci-fi stuff. Is the real world's kind of like, okay, we're going to steal that right now. We're not going to wait 200 years for that.
But I think the biggest miss of this episode in terms of technology is smartphones, because they didn't predict them at all. And I think if they had, if the characters in this were in real 2024 and everyone had smartphones, that would have solved this episode like the episode would have happened, because a major plot point is that they can't get access to the outside world.
Sure.
Now, I guess you could say that maybe they confiscated everyone's phones, but I know maybe a lot of homeless people don't have phones, but I'm sure some would. Like, some had reasonable jobs beforehand, were just down on their luck. So I don't know. It's hard to believe that no one in there would have phones unless they confiscated them.
But that would also remove the whole need to go down to the job center and keep checking in, as you could just have the app on your phone.
Yeah.
It's like, it can't be that technology because we need the episode to happen. And so they have to be restricted. I mean, now at least they did realize that there was going to be an internet of a sort. They do have that kind of little communication inner device.
So 94 was the internet was around, but it was
early stages, man. I think that's like AOL discs and stuff there.
So that's what I think this episode got right the most.
Yeah,
I think that a lot of things revolve around the internet, and they actually even protected internet ads, because I had that one guard trying to log on, and it's like, skip the commercial or whatever.
Yeah, I did have to laugh about that. I'm like, yeah, well, that's, Google is eternal, I guess.
But in this episode, a lot of people sort of get caught up in the fact they call it the net, and no one really refers to it as the net. But I mean, come on, it's 94.
Just Sandra Bullock.
Yeah.
Back in the early days.
Yeah.
Well, here's all this little shorthand, man. We'll be hip.
But some things I wonder about, like, if they would really have the technology, because when Cisco and Bashir are filling out the things, I think they're using pen and paper. And I think most offices still, especially one that was this underfunded, would probably definitely use pen and paper. But I have seen some use iPads, or you can log in on your phone or whatever.
Dude, I can't tell you how many doctor's visits I still go to, and it is all pen and paper.
Oh,
man.
really?
Every first thing you got to do, it's like, look, we just want to take up your time. We have all this information on the computer, but we just want you to fill it out for us again. Gives us a little time before we ask you in.
Yeah, Stephen Kennedy in the chat saying, I still remember the time with no internet. Yeah, I remember that too, but it's hard for me to imagine how I got by.
I still keep a Thomas guide in my bookshelf and stuff here, just in case the power ever goes out and I need a map. Because, anybody that wants to go back in time to pre-internet days, you are crazy. You would hate yourself in 5 freaking minutes.
See, I went to college around 2009, 2010, and I would have flunked if I didn't have the internet. I'm so perplexed how people, I guess they actually had to go to the library and look up all these books. I don't know. I would have flunked if I didn't have the internet.
I had to file paperwork when I was in college with the engineering department at UCLA through their, internet system, which was like a step up from the original DARPA Manet, where you still had numbered addresses and things. It was just before the World Wide Web even became a thing. And you had to use numbered access, and it was it was a very makes me feel old thinking about it. But it's like, no. I would never want to go back to those days.
No, not at all. But yeah, and the other thing about smartphones, like that would have helped the whole storyline with Dax finding Cisco. I feel like that would have made that a lot easier.
Oh yeah, I mean the only thing is you would just have to. It's like, where do we send an email to somebody? Where do we put a poster board? They would have to learn to navigate. Do you get on Facebook? Do you make a Facebook account? It would end up being a social media episode, and nobody would want that.
But I do
Do I
like.
do Facebook or a TikTok?
Oh, by the way, this kind of reminds me. You know, Brian George, who does the pitch meetings. On his own channel, he has this. He doesn't do it as often. Like every once in a while, he'll do videos where there's a time traveler from the 90s who goes into current time and reports back to the 90s on like a talk show, and he talks about things like Google, and the guy from the 90s like, what is that, some fancy tool? Like just doesn't understand this stuff.
Oh yeah, and he's always like, please let me come home.
Yeah. Well, especially during the pandemic.
Yes.
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah,
but
no.
The one thing I was interested in though is the scene where Dax is ordering new IDs, because it made me curious. Like, could somebody actually do that online without actually going in person to somewhere? And she said, "Oh, it took me a while because I had to convince the system that I was who I said I was," which, as we know, Jadzia actually doesn't have an identity. Basically, what she's saying, she had to like forge the document somehow. So, do you think that would be possible for someone to do that? Like, she did have access to a billionaire.
I mean, assuming they have more computer skills than I do, which is not a reach, so I would imagine it's totally possible. I also know that once you get a Gmail email address, you can pretty much do anything you want, and those things are free. So I would imagine if you're able to put in the time, you could probably go pretty far to establish a general identity. But no, I would imagine having a billionaire helping you out was going to open up any doors that might get closed.
Yeah, I just don't know if like you would need like a birth certificate or something. I don't know what someone who had like no identities whatsoever. I feel like they would have to go through more bureaucratic hoops and like see people in person. I don't know. Maybe having access to the billionaire would have helped. I don't know.
You know, there are so many different digital accesses and things. I think you could probably go pretty far if you had resources and really were, from the 24th century back here with a higher understanding of connectives. Though I doubt that you would understand any of the computer code at the time. So would that even help you?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Like, I get that she's a science officer and she knows all technology, but she's familiar with 24th century technology, which is different than 2024 technology. It was the same thing in Star Trek 4 when Scotty goes back to the past and he like does the computers like how quaint, and he's like super fast. But I'm thinking like he should actually suck at typing the computer because he's used to talking to it. And they even made that point when it goes, "Hello, computer." So he should actually suck at working like an actual keyboard.
Yeah, well, that's also when you could do a couple of things in a full 3D processing AI, spin program would pop up. So, no, I mean, ultimately, what is this? It is, it's the technological shortcut that they're from the future. They're brilliant. They'll figure out a way to make it happen. They just figure out how to hack the system because they know fancy future things. And ultimately, once you went in, if you could convince an app or whatever to check this box for whatever its requirements are, then you're able to go. Because ultimately, that's what everything that you submit's going to be is just, a 1 or a 0. Checkbox
Yeah.
or not checkbox.
Yeah, I suppose. I like Stephen Kennedy's theory. Jadzia calls the local mafia.
Yeah, exactly. That's why she looks over at the guy and says, "Hi, I've got a little problem. Can you solve it?" And he goes, "Yes." He calls his assistant, who does whatever mysterious things happen that assistants do, and voila, money is spent and IDs are had.
Oh God, Norman Buckwald's saying that Jadzia may have gotten her ID done courtesy of Pella in New England. Took me a few seconds to get a
very nice.
Strange New
Good.
Worlds reference. And
Yeah,
by the
good
way,
reach, Norman. Nice.
just Strange New Worlds reference, totally good. Just so you know, Picard season 2 references not okay. That will not be tolerated.
I don't know this thing you speak of. I think you're remembering some sort of fever dream. Let's move on.
Yeah,
Let's move on.
I think you're right actually. Someone said something. Oh yeah, so War Hero 99, who is the rich guy supposed to be today? You know, I was thinking about that, and I think I came to the conclusion that I don't buy this character as a billionaire. Like, he's too nice, and he seems a bit naive as well. I don't know. The closest I could come up with Mark Zuckerberg, but that guy is such a smug prick. It's
No. He's a tech bro whose startup worked out well, but he's still primarily rich because his family is rich. So yeah, I don't know if he's anyone does he have to be someone specific? Are we trying to figure out?
Yeah,
here?
I think, but I don't think he matches with someone specific. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think he's just like, some guy that was the first against the wall once the gates came down.
They were thinking of Bill Gates, I suspect. Yeah, because he was around then. But
well, there is always the urge they like to do that the billionaires are going to be nice. There is the belief of a Bruce Wayne when most of them are more like Luther.
True.
You got to do bad things to get $1 billion, is what I'm saying here. Okay.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I'm sure there's some halfway decent people with that much money, but we'll see. But the one thing I didn't buy was that a billionaire would be alone in the subway. We just happened to come across Dax knocked out.
No, I mean, all of that is like, oh, it's the pretty girl who gets caught up by the rich guy who sweeps her. I mean, again, it's all quick shorthand. This way we can solve any of our problems because it's Jadzia and she's beautiful. So therefore, rich guy must appear to rescue her.
Well, there's a bit of racial commentary too there. That the pretty white woman is the one who ends up in the cushy, well-to-do place where the two people of color get thrown in the. Yeah.
I don't think that is a mistaken viewpoint.
No,
I don't think that was unintended at all.
It was not unintentional.
Because yes, of course they are troublemakers, and she is a lost innocent lamb that needs fair guidance.
There are two. Sorry to change the subject, but there are two New Zealand references in this episode, which I didn't get the first time I watched it, but I watched it later when I moved to New Zealand. I was like, "Hey, New Zealand!" When he's talking about Jadzia's tattoos, she's like, "Oh, these tattoos." She's like, "Yeah, I used to have a Maori tribal pattern all the way down." So that's first New Zealand reference. The second one was when at the party, and there was like, "Oh, how did you enjoy your trip to Christchurch?" And it's like, "Oh, I did a bit of skiing in Mount Cook." And now I'm like, yeah, I've been to those places. But it's funny because I feel like they're trying to make the difference, the contrast, that the billionaires could go all the way to New Zealand just for a ski trip, whereas, all these people are in the streets with no jobs.
Well, yeah, and you really couldn't go any further. I think that's actually the longest flight in the world, going from the West Coast all the way down into I think it's actually like Sydney or something like
Yeah, I
that.
think Sydney's longer. Yeah, it's close enough.
But yeah, I mean, it's literally like, yeah, you can get as far away as possible, and that's just, hey, a good time. Uh,
So the other piece of technology I'm just looking at that I wanted to talk about was the eye scanners. How are there, and I'm trying to think, are there actually like places, does that technology in use, does that exist as an in use where they actually have to do the, like, I don't know, at the like the super CIA or something like that. I don't know if they're actually, you see them in bullshit like movies like Mission Impossible, but I wonder, are they is stuff like that actually
no,
in use?
they do. They do have retinal scanners. They have because it's basically it's a biometric. So they've got the fingerprints, they've got retinals, they've got all because they use different areas will have different biometrics. They're not incredibly common as far as I know,
Hmm.
but they are, it is out there. You can look for security packages and things, and they'll give
Oh,
you
okay.
biometric requirements all the way up to and including a retinal scan, which I think it's actually more of like an iris scan as opposed to an actual like, retinal inside. I think they're too concerned about that light that you would need for that probably.
Okay. Like, I was just thinking, I know some smartphones have like facial recognition where you just scan your face, but that's, yeah, not as detailed as that.
Right. Yeah. So you could imagine for higher security and or military that an eye
Yeah.
to retinal scan is not that's not really that big of a step up in technology.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I was thinking though that the way it was depicted in this episode seemed like it was kind of commonly used. So for me, I felt like that was an example of them pitching a bit too far advanced that we didn't quite.
yeah. Yeah. Again, I think it ends up being really at that point a practicality issue because I think you can get with a facial recognition scan, that type of biometric is just as good for the most part as a retinal scan would be on a commercial level. So they're probably like, we don't need that and we don't want to endanger anybody's eyes and get sued. Just scan your face.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. Little bit of a high expectation right there. Um, but you have to offset their computer choices. So some are going to be high, some are going to be low.
Indeed. I was trying to. All right, I was trying to bring up the picture, but the technology is not working. Speaking of technology, but I was trying to bring up the picture of Dax with a feather in her hair, um, because that is like, okay, so when is this fashion supposed to be here now? Everyone's got to hurry up and get to this. This is the fashion, the clothes that they're wearing, and at that party scene.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm never a big fan of like, future past expected fashion. It just always ends up being what are they going to do? And it would just again, but especially with the spots, it's just kind of look like a peacock at that point.
I know, well, I appreciate that fashion is a very hard thing to predict because it is nonsensical and you can never tell what, like, because like even in the 90s I'm sure they were thinking that the current fashion there would look ridiculous like in the 60s. So yeah, but I don't know why they thought a feather and and the hair would make sense.
Just again, it makes her look special and great. But yeah, I always thought it's kind of funny that when it all comes down to everybody tries to do this special like jacket shifts and fashion changes, and it's like, honestly, it's a tux. It's been the same thing for 100 years, and it's probably going to be the same thing for the next 100 years. And then probably going to be safe. What is it? Jeans and a t-shirt, man. That's universal from the 50s to
Yeah,
now. You can
yeah.
get away with that.
True. Well, like the clothes Gabriel Bell was wearing. That,
Oh yeah, very
yeah,
much universal. You'd totally see that now. Yeah.
yeah. But Yeah, and also like the way they did her hair because she was like full on. They changed her hairdo. It was like really stylized. I'm like, so Jadzia like took the time to get like see a hairstylist for like and sit in a chair for a couple hours while she was worried about her friends. I don't know.
Well, but I think in some ways that is a commentary unto itself. Is we're getting the shots of the homeless people that are on the streets and people fighting for space in a hallway, you know, and which house you're going to be, and food tickets and all this stuff. And then you have the rich shot that obviously, hi, I just spent several hours to get all gussied up and I've got matching feathers in my hair from the farthest away lands, you know, from Christchurch. That's what I was down there skiing and getting feathers. Um,
Yeah.
so, I mean, in that sense, I think it's almost that was super big, really, to just tell the difference because, yeah, you're obviously worried about your friends, but for hours you will sit here getting gussied up so you can interact in with this party and hopefully meet some people that might help. They're starving, by the way, but you know, you look
Yeah.
great. Congratulations. Did you have a little snack tray next to you while that was all happening?
So yeah, Norman Buckwell's comment's pretty interesting. I guess I could see Lady Gaga in that getup. Yeah, but she's Lady Gaga. Like she's always wears crazy shit. It's a bit unique than even the average rich person. But yeah, but that whole scene where I like that whole scene where she's at that party and they did. I feel like that the other people that she was talking to, the other rich people she was talking to, should have had like this more of a like this stuck up kind of. I don't know if I could do the voice, the kind of accent. Oh yes, those people are so below me. Like this, it had that kind of feeling to it. But I like it because it shows how jaded and unconcerning, especially those well-to-do, are for those and that are more in need, and how they totally disregard how they're like, oh yes, these sanctuary districts need to exist. It's a place where those kind of people can go and get out of our way.
Why do you appear to be so concerned with the hoi polloi and their troubles and flights? They're taken care of. They have an area where they can sleep and lay down their slovenly bodies. Plus, we provide occasional food for them.
Indeed. So I was just reading Stephen's comment, saying, "Did you find how to pronounce that name? It's Finola. Okay, it's a name of an actress that I mispronounced or I couldn't figure out how to pronounce. She's the one who played Mrs. Hawkins on Lost.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you did it because you're supposed to. That one anyway.
Okay.
Apparently,
Yeah.
she's a really well-known actress in Ireland, where Stephen is from. So it's kind of getting on me to learn how to pronounce her name, but that's all right.
Finola. Finola?
Finola. Is it Finola?
I'm just he's got the right down. I thought he sounds like he has a
Yeah.
pronunciation. Finola.
Finola.
Finola Flanagan. I don't know, man. I've been watching a lot of British procedurals lately, and so we've got the current one
Oh,
is
really?
Welsh. So it's like you've got the Gaelic and the Welsh, and you've got all this lovely language, and I'm kind of swimming in it. So that's
We're getting
lovely
kind
of
of
me.
off topic, but I was thinking, like, when I lived in New Zealand, like I lived there and I was used to their accents, and there was a lot of Australians that lived over there, so I was used to their accents. But then I would watch an Australian movie, and I would have to put the subtitles on because I couldn't understand a word. I'm like, why is it that I have no problem understanding Australians in real life, but in the movie, it's I don't know. And
Well, that's television Australian. It's a completely different accent, and nobody actually speaks it. You have to go to school for it.
like or a Guy Ritchie film, I think I had to put the subtitles on lock stock the first time I saw it.
Oh, well, I mean, look, just to understand Brad Pitt at all. I mean, and that's just you're only still picking up like every fifth word and have to sort of string it
Well,
together.
that was meant to be incomprehensible. I was talking about more of the normal banter that was supposed to be comprehensible. Um, Anywho, let's get into some of the serious stuff now. I heard some people talking already in the chat about what's going on in California. Um, which I had looked up before I came on and saw that 30% of the US's homeless population is in California,
Yep.
which is so it seems like this episode picked the right state to set their thing in. Although I will say, as bad as the situation is now, which it is, and we'll get more into that. This is a little worse, like but I can see this actually happening. This could go in
Sure.
this direction if we're not careful enough. Um, but the one thing is that that makes this situation worse is that they have walls. They treat it like a prison. And if you don't have ID, they skirt anyone into the place. And from what I understand, that's not this. Like you don't have to. It's kind of almost like Nazi Germany type, where they ask for your papers, and that's not currently the situation. They don't go around checking everyone's ID and making sure they have ID.
Sure, but like you said, the real terror of this episode is the incrementality and the fact that we're seeing it, that it's hitting too close on. It's like, what, in 2024 we're outloading, we're making it unlawful to be homeless and shoving them all in ghettos effectively, or concentration camps within the cities, walled off special areas. That's crazy. You're right. That's Nazi Germany. We wouldn't do that. Except it is 2024, and for anyone specific, it's Grants Pass versus Johnson. It was decided by the Supreme Court this past June that did make it allowable for you to make it a crime to camp in public spaces. Again, it's not specifically saying being homeless makes you unlawful at this stage. Is you cannot camp. And if you are, they can confiscate all of your stuff and they can submit, I think what it was for Grants Pass, the punishments that they had was fines for up to $1,000 and or up to 30 days in jail. And they've said that they considered that those punishments imposed limited fines don't qualify as cruel and unusual because they are not designed to impose terror, pain, or disgrace. The arguments against these types of laws is the Eighth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which says you can't have cruel and unusual punishment. And it was deemed that making it be unlawful to be homeless is arresting someone. That's cruel and unusual punishment. Now they're saying, oh, no, it's not, because we're not really meant to hurt you. We are just trying to dissuade you with the forces that we have available to us.
Now, it was my understanding that the Supreme Court ruling just allowed states to do that, and that Governor Newsom a month ago passed a law in California that allows local governments to do that. So it's not saying, didn't blanket saying this is definitely the law in all of California. It's like kicking it back to the local governments, whatever. But that's just as bad because a lot of local governments are doing that, and I do find that actually very similar to this episode. That because I was just talking about they don't just cart anyone off with an ID, but now they're kicking out people who are in tents who have nowhere else to go.
Right.
And they're just arresting them? Like, they don't even move them?
Again, what they can do, basically you're right. The Supreme Court didn't say this is the punishment, this is the law, this is the thing. They're saying this was the law that Grants passed. And they're saying, yeah, that's okay because you're not imposing fines that are cruel and unusual, which basically then allowed other cities or other states to pass laws of a similar kind with their own particular personal twists. And those might be argued depending on whether or not those seem to be too much greater or worse or more imposing. But yeah, it's do they just shuffle you off first? Is it a sequential thing, and then it can get worse and worse? That's really up to every individual state, and we know how responsible individual states can be with certain powers.
Yeah. Um, but it's yeah, no, but it is very poignant. In fact, this is where the episode I think really gets it correct.
Mhm.
Where even though the specifics obviously aren't exactly the same, we don't have a walled off sort of prison type situation, but it's similar in regards that they want them out of sight. Like they don't want to see homeless people in the cities. They're trying to get them out of sight, and by sort of arresting them is kind of criminalizing being homeless, which is and also some local governments give them fines. I'm like, they give homeless people fines. Like, what sense does that make? And
Yeah, how is that going to help you get a home if you have thousands of dollars in fines for not having a home? Yeah.
yeah. And so, and also it gets into the main like motivation where they're sort of criminalizing the homeless instead of trying to get to the root issues of why people are homeless in the first place.
Well,
And
yeah, and that's, I mean, in many ways, that's kind of the bigger issue. And you're right. All of this is a way of like literally sweeping things under the rug and putting them out of the way. But why do you have so many people homeless? Well, one of the reasons is in 550 cities in the US right now, the average home price is $1 million. To afford $1 million home, you need an income of $150,000 to $200,000 a year, depending on how much you put down, 15 or 20% down. The median income in the US is $37,000. If we're talking household, that's $75,000. So that's still barely halfway to the minimum to afford the medium price house. And that just forces people into higher and higher prices. Rents go higher, more money is spent on that. And all of a sudden, the reason that you're homeless isn't because you don't have a job, it's because you can't pay your rent. And is that really is that really what we want? That doesn't seem fair.
well, it does seem like, because I'm also looking at Jake Kamen's comments saying that this episode assuming that all people who lost their jobs lost their homes. And I do think in the episode that it does seem like all the people in the sanctuary district lost their jobs. They never talk about, because you wonder, because just because they get a job doesn't mean they can afford the place to live. So you
Right.
wonder if they allow people to commute between the sanctuary district and a job. Given the context of the prison walls, it doesn't seem like they do.
Well, I mean, I think simplifying it for the story it was telling was probably one of the reasons why you don't have a lot of these, because ultimately, yes, what you would do is you would allow people to work out of here, but then they would be shuffled back by the end of their day. If you don't have a place to go to, this is where you are, and you have work crews, kind of like prisons have work crews that go out and do particular jobs or have day
Yeah,
passes and have to go back and be back at jail at night, depending on their particular sentence or privilege or any of that.
yeah,
But I think the thing is all you have to do is kind of steer stuff slowly. If the fines are getting to be too much for people, well, then you're like, well, we can't keep fining you for being homeless. We have to give you a home. This is a giant shelter area. And we'll just pass an ordinance that says if you don't have a home, then you've got to live in this shelter area because we can't have you camping on the street because that's illegal. And they just slowly push people into these things. Again, it's the incrementality of it all that
yeah,
starts to get worse and worse. And we slowly as a society go, well, at least they're out of their way. Oh, but they're being taken care of. They have job assistance. At least they have a safe place to stay. If we're not in it, we can make those type of excuses. And if we allow it, then we can make it easier and easier to just, again, shuffle these people, literally sweep them under the rug, find a giant rug and sweep them under it.
Yeah, but there's also, it made me think about also the vicious cycle that exists in some places where no job will hire you unless you have an address, and if you don't have an address, how are you supposed to get a job in order to get an address? Like,
you got to be presentable for work. You got to have fresh, clean clothes. You got to be cleaned yourself. So you can't go to the Y anymore, right? They still have YMCA's. I know there's like 5 of them.
There's still a lot of shelters around. I know the state I live in is actually really good at having a lot of shelters and places that provide resources. I don't know if maybe California or other Western states are a bit more overwhelmed where they can't really.
There are shelters, but what happens is you run out of room. There's also rules for being in a shelter that not everyone is willing to go for. Most of them is like, you can't have pets. And there's a lot of homeless people that have a small dog or cat. Why? Because you want companionship.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. They're also, limited on space, on stuff that you have, and so there's a lot of reasons why homeless people won't use a shelter, even if the space is available. And with LA, at least, the problem is there's no room in the shelter anyway.
Yeah. Warhammer was asking what state is that? What state do I live in? It's Maryland. And I don't know. I don't really get to the big cities that often. I would imagine the homeless situation is definitely worse there, but don't really notice it that much around where I live. But
well, and you have a lot of, even though we have a bad thing here in California in regards to an overall homeless population, in Pasadena where I work, we used to have a bigger homeless population than we do now.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, I believe, is due to the police just cleaning things up. There's a shelter not far from where I work, and I know that they're busy a lot, and we used to kind of see things. But a lot of times, is you have certain police actions that just work to shuffle that off, and that's either moving them to shelters, or what very often happens is they drive them to another city, drop them off, and leave. And then you're just basically pushing the population further out.
Yeah, so they just transport them elsewhere so they can be somewhere else.
Yeah. And you see that with a lot of, when they have hospital situations, we have issues and complaints of stuff of patient drop-offs in the middle of the city or in the middle of nowhere. And so often you just have a patient dropped off there saying it's by a bus stop, or it's, near a train station or something. And they're just left. That's
that is dystopian. That is very similar to what this episode is.
And the scary thing, I think it's the question that Bashir and Cisco speak about of like, how can we allow this to happen? What is the states? We're the richest country in the history of the planet. We're the richest country on the planet right now, and we're the richest country that's ever been on the planet. Why do we have a homeless population?
Because all of that wealth is concentrated in a very small percentage of the population.
And we have to start really choosing and deciding what kind of world is it that we want to live in. Do we want to move forward? What are the rights of being a citizen? What is it? What do we think each of us are owed that are here? Or, what is our rights and our responsibilities if we are given these things? Do we have a right to health care? Do we have a right to a home? Do we have a right to get a job, or the opportunity to get a job? I'm not saying yes or no to any of these questions. I'm just saying these are the types of questions that I think we really need to start asking, because Otherwise, this is only going to get worse. This is not a portent of a good, safe future. I mean, I know eventually in Star Trek it does work itself out, but I also believe there's really some dark roads in the Star Trek universe between now and the Federation.
All right. Well, jumping back to the episode real quick. That brings up a critique that a lot of people, including myself, had as this episode, that because when Gabriel Bell dies, it changes the future, so the Federation no longer exists. So World War III is about to happen in like 20, 30 years. So it makes me wonder how much difference would this Bell Riots really make in a grand scheme of things if half the population of the world is about to get wiped out anyway?
What are you, some kind of communist asking a question like that? No. Move on next. Sorry, you never saw any of that. I mean, that is an excellent point. But what it might, depending on how that war came out, maybe the U.S. would have been in a different position when that war breaks out, or have different goals.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, are we like, do we become more isolationist, or do we become more globally oriented? I mean, just those two different philosophies can make a huge difference on how something plays out. And a thing like the Bell Riot could potentially change that, the culture's specific viewpoint at a very crucial time. And I think that's a really smart sounding answer for that.
All right, I want to get off. I don't want to get off another topic, but I feel like I have to. Where War Hero is saying, look at how things are going in regards to World War III. My money is on Russia starting it all. My money is on Israel starting it all. But that is another discussion altogether.
What, the eternal powder keg of the planet, the Middle East? You think things would blow up down there? Oh my God! Yeah. No, look.
And then yeah,
Russia is just mushroom
involved,
stamping
China
right
would get
now.
involved. Everyone get involved. So yeah, I mean, but that's been a danger since the '60s. So that's kind of nothing new. The danger of World War III.
I mean, yeah, I think you have a higher likelihood of that being from the Middle East or some more rogue actor like North Korea mushroom stamping or feeling threatened. You could possibly have, the one thing that could put with Russia is if Ukraine pushes much further, Russia could consider dropping a nuke to say, hey, stop, go no further. But I don't think that would necessarily precipitate a larger nuclear war, but it may precipitate a larger conventional conflict.
Well, see, I don't know if nukes, I mean, they could get involved eventually, but what I'm saying is Israel's trying very hard to start a war with Iran and Lebanon. And then once you get those, if the actual war breaks out there, then you have all these bigger countries picking sides and joining the wars, and the U.S. have so much interest over there, and Russia could, it could balloon out into like a world thing.
No. I completely agree. And
because to be clear, hold on, sorry, 1 second. To be clear, Israel doesn't want to start a war between Israel and Iran. Israel wants to start a war between the U.S. and Iran.
Yeah. In my humble opinion, and you can take that for whatever it's worth, and as far as you wish to take that, I think everyone in the Middle East right now are much too interested in fighting than they are in finding peace. I think they get more out of a war. I think they get more support for their ways. And I think people are extreme enough to not care about anything but their ultimate goal at this point. And therefore, I do think that there is a completely big danger that can easily escalate into a much wider conflict.
That's what I'm most worried about now, and also for the fact that China very, very, very much wants to take over Taiwan, and all these other countries in the U.S. are poised to stop them from doing so. So that's another. And if a war breaks out in the Middle East, they could take advantage of that while the U.S. is distracted, and they could bring out a much bigger war.
Oh, I thought that Ukraine was the perfect point that China was watching to see what to do with Taiwan and see how everybody else was going to react and
No,
how it worked out.
that's a
Then I
good
think
point.
they went, all right, we're going to just take our time with this. But you're right. All it takes is a distraction, and then other things can happen because nobody wants to fight a war on two fronts.
Yeah. War here is saying Quark did say war is good for business. That's a rule of acquisition, but that rule of acquisition right next, because that's the 34th rule, and the 35th rule is peace is good for business.
Yeah.
He's
I was
like,
about to say, I
it's
think
easy to
that
get them confused.
that has an easy that has an easy counter. I do believe that was actually used to get a Vulcan to look logically, if I remember correctly. There's a great episode where Quark makes a
Oh,
Vulcan.
the
Makes the
Maquis. Yeah.
yeah.
That's right.
Anyway, slightly off topic right there, talking about
No, but that's it's all
rules of
related.
acquisition. I guess
But
it's an aside. It's not too far off.
I wanted to bring up another factoid about this episode. It's not really related to anything we're talking about, but I just thought about it. Was when you watched this episode last, I don't know if you remember, did you watch it on streaming, or was it, back in the 90s, or was it on DVD?
Oh no, it was on streaming because I rewatched this pretty recently, like in the past year.
So do you remember when the scene where Kira and O'Brien go to the 60s and they see the hippies that are tripping and they go like peace? Do you remember what song was playing?
I do not remember which song.
Because I think on streaming service is random guitar, like just some, fair use or something.
Mm-hmm.
But in the original air, it was Jimi Hendrix song Joe. And that was on the DVD as well. So I've seen this episode like a billion times, like when it first aired on DVD, and then I watched it once on streaming, and I was like, as soon as that scene came on, I was like, what the hell is this? And it's just some random guitar playing.
I think I do remember the random guitar playing and not the Jimi Hendrix in that scene. Again, I can't tell you 100%, but for some reason I'm thinking of just more like bing, 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 bing.
Yeah.
Bing, 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 bing,
And I
bing,
feel
bing,
so bad for everyone who saw that for the first time, because the scene is so much better with the Jimi Hendrix song. I was like blown away with how that Jimi Hendrix song enhances that scene so much.
Never a truer statement has been said. That scene is so much better with Jimi Hendrix in the background. Yes, I think that applies with most things, to be honest.
Yeah, to be clear, if to be fair, yeah. But yeah, apparently it was a rights issue.
I would imagine that it would be either so,
they
or they're just like, we don't want to keep paying this. We'll just put something else in. It's remastered.
Very cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jay came in this saying I wanted to see what O'Brien saw in 2048, because he mentions in the episode, I went to 2048 and it was bad, but it's never that bad. This is way worse than it should be. But again, that was a budget thing. I'm sure they didn't want to spend the money. They would probably have to spend a lot of money to go even further into the future. And yeah.
Well, and the reality is, you're going to make something so much cooler in your mind than what they're going to show you on TV there. There's some times where you just want to play with the audience and just be like, oh, you just want to see it in his face. Like, what did he see? What could have done that? That's so much more entertaining. Yeah, but show me, don't tell me. Yeah, okay, that is. He showed you with his face.
So there was one line in this episode that I always used to quote to myself in a certain part of my life. The line where BC says, "Jobs? You people want jobs? When are you gonna get it? There are no jobs." and there was like 2 years I lived in New Zealand and I couldn't get a job, so I kept that kept playing in my head over and over again. But I will say, now New Zealand's not perfect. It's not a paradise. There are some homeless population there, but I know firsthand their system. First of all, they got universal health care and stuff like that. I went to the hospital several times. No insurance, zero cost. But on top of all that, they when I had was in that situation where I couldn't find a job, I got really good assistance from the government and really good assistance in finding a job and very good help. Whereas when I had to ask for job assistance here in the US of A, they gave me shit. I wouldn't have been able to live on that unless I lived with my parents. And they were like Nazis with trying to get me to take any shitty job that was available that wouldn't have helped me. So I don't know. We're getting back to why the U.S. richest population, we're richest country in the world, has such a problem. Yeah, that's kind of why. And I'm sure New Zealand's not alone. There's probably plenty of other developed countries that are also just have all those social constructs and things in place that make the homeless problem not as bad.
Some basic societal structures and support systems can be helpful. Not treating people like crap is also very helpful. Showing them some respect and not assuming that they are criminals or drug users or child abusers or crazy people or any of that stuff, which I think we do tend to judge. I think we also have a certain meritocracy in this system that equates success with morality, that good people are successful and rich and bad people are poor. And I think that is something we desperately need to change, because again, we tend to equate anybody that has money or is successful as innately good or better than other people. And therefore, if you are poor, then you obviously must be doing something wrong in order to be in that position.
I think that aspect of our culture, society is slowly changing. I think it is. I think it has been since the 80s. I think the 80s was the height of rich people good, poor people
Sure.
bad. And I think since then it's been slowly progressing as things have gotten worse. That there's more people in financial straits, so more people sort of relate to, oh, maybe, maybe not such a good idea,
But again, I think it's also what is it that we believe that we as a society, what is our societal minimums that we find acceptable? And in New Zealand, obviously, they're like, okay, certain respect, looking for job. If you get support, it needs to be support where you can actually afford a place and do a thing. There's a different expectations, maybe in price of living and such as well. In the U.S., it's what is that? What are the minimums that we expect? Are we okay with the teacher that has to be an Uber driver at night just to pay their bills?
Yeah.
Are we okay with people that have one full-time job but have to have another part-time or two in order just to meet the very minimum of existence? Do you have to have roommates for the rest of your life because you can never afford to own your own place? And, if you and the wife then can afford a place and you have kids, now you have to send your kids off to daycare all day long so you both could work. And how much is that going to cost you as well?
Yeah. This is a basic cost of living.
Yeah.
It's too damn high.
And
it's funny. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and do we think that that's what we need to do, is just work all the time in order to give other people money for rent?
And it's funny because I've read an article a while back, which I thought was very interesting, that polyamory is becoming a lot more common, that there's a lot of people joining in like 3 or 4 groups because it's cheaper to live, and that's why they're doing it.
Sure. I mean, that is a way if you need to, if you can make that work. I find it enough work with my wife and myself and a family. I I can't even imagine trying to squeeze somebody else in. I think I don't even see how that would work. But if you can, great for you. But yeah, that's, I mean, I don't know. I think the cost of living, and especially for rent and home prices and stuff, I think that's the biggest impact. Because again, if you can't afford to buy a place, then you are homeless by definition. How many people have full-time jobs living in their car? I mean, I know that's basically what I work to do. I work to pay rent. As I tell people, I don't make any money. I'm a conduit for money. Money comes in and then I send it off to other people. And that is my existence and has been for years.
But that's also what I've always been saying to people are like, oh, why, you should get the money to the top and it trickles down, which has been proven to not be true. Where the fact is, if you give the money to the more needy, that money gets shoot right back into the economy, and so it helps other people, and so it gets the economy going and flowing. Rather than the rich that will just store it in the Cayman Islands or something and just sit on it as it collapses.
They invest it, they store it, they buy art with it, they do all of that. When you're on the lower end of the spectrum and you get money, you spend it. You pay bills, you pay rent, you buy food. You maybe get your kids something. But yeah, it's the money flows from the bottom up, not from the top down.
And I still can't believe there's people who still believe in trickle down economics today. It's been like they did a study. They proved that, hey.
Yeah, they did a study over the past 50 years. Countries all over the world studied changes in GDP depending on tax structure. And the only thing that lower tax rates for the rich did is it gave the rich more money and increased income inequality in those nations. But it did nothing to change GDP. It did nothing to change investments. It did nothing to change any of that. What? Rich people aren't going to invest in business because they have to pay a slightly higher tax rate? Oh, no. Yes. It used to be. I mean, the thing is, people always talk about like the golden age of the U.S., post World War II in the 50s and 60s and how much, well, the government was building freeways. They were supporting home building across the country. The upper tax rate was also 95%.
Yes. Yeah.
It wasn't until Reagan who dropped it from 78% down into 38% or something like that.
Yeah.
With the idea that this would boost investment. And it doesn't. What that does is it makes business people go, oh, it used to be if I made too much money, I would be taxed high a lot. So I would reinvest that into the business, be it in pay for employees or quality or upgrade all the equipment or any of that stuff, because you can spend all that money and not get taxed on it. But if you take it out, then you have to pay these high tax rates. Once you drop those high tax rates, then it's cheaper for them to just take the money out and lower the cost that they have to pay for anything else. It's not an incentive to invest in your business anymore. It's an incentive to extract from your business.
Yeah. Voodoo economics, as Norman says.
Yes.
It's absolutely the case. I was also Jay came in earlier, said that doesn't mean that all homeless people are good and all rich people are bad because they had a bad experience with homeless people. And I think that is true, because when you are needy, some people get desperate. And I've in my life had all my stuff that I owned stolen from a car when I was moving. That was not fun. And so, yeah, I get that there can be bad experience, but that's also what this episode tackles when the ghosts characters like BC. He's meant to represent that, because I think it's interesting that they point out, oh, we don't allow people with criminal records in here. There are no criminals in here. Yet the person who works there knows that there's a group of people called ghosts who are violent and will attack other people, and yet they don't really do anything about that. So it's more of the fact, and I think that would breed more in this particular situation when you throw all these people in a concentration camp like that. You'll breed that kind of behavior, and it's sort of like the more desperate they are, the more often you'll get criminal behavior like that.
Sure. I mean, and you also have, I mean, Drew, you have mentally ill amongst the homeless. A lot of people that can't maintain a job or maintain a home because they have mental illness, and there is not social support structures that will do that. Again, Reagan closing down a lot of the mental health facilities and kind of began and perpetuated a lot of this stuff. I don't like Reagan, folks. I'm just I don't want to sugarcoat anything.
But
those are real issues that you're going to have, and therefore you can have violence and you can have those types of things that happen.
Saying that they didn't address drugs in the episode. Well, I don't know. I think it could be implied. Like, I think they didn't really need to outright state it because the episode was already doing a lot of stuff. But yeah, that I would imagine people with addictions would be thrown in the sanctuary district instead of giving the aid that they need. That would definitely also be a case.
Sure. And also, just because you don't have a criminal record doesn't mean you're not a criminal.
Yeah.
That is one thing as well. That's plus, true. Yeah, you could just be, I get other people to do all of the criminal stuff. So if they get in trouble, they get tossed out, but I'm here a king. I mean, it's like there's always ways around those types of ideas.
Now, sorry, you had
no, go ahead.
All right. So getting specifically to the character of BC, which I like this actor. I think is a really good performance. I like the character, how he tries to be all polite, but in the like sarcastic sort of evil kind of way. But what I like about him is that I read a quote from Irish Stephen Barry, who wrote the episode, saying that he didn't want him to be like the villain of the week. He didn't want him to be the bad guy. He wanted him to be relatable and someone that you could see, who does bad things, but you can understand his frustration and where he's coming from. And I think that the episode partly pulls this off. I think by having him kill Gabriel Bell kind of hurts that, like he's a murderer. So, I mean, when you have him threatening hostage by gunpoint, I mean, you could still have him be relatable, but the fact they had him actually murder, it seemed like plot convenience so they could have Cisco take Gabriel Bell's place, let's be honest here. But I almost feel like when I was watching this episode yesterday, I almost felt like they should have had someone else kill Gabriel Bell rather than not BC, because that made him is a bit harder to relate to him.
Well, yeah, because he becomes the villain immediately because he has killed an innocent in the middle of a fight,
Yeah.
And you're right, it's hard to come back. And they do a certain amount to try and give an identity to what his motivations are on this and why he's like that. And you're right, in that sense, I think they are trying to, make it a little less black and white and a little bit more gray. But you're right. I think it would have been better to have somebody else have killed him, and thus he wasn't stained with that particular crime. And you could see that. It's, it's a more extreme example, but it's the same thing to me as kind of like Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars. You can believe he can be redeemed all you want by, Return of the Jedi. But the minute that you see that Episode 3 and wiping out a bunch of kids, he's done. He's done. There's no coming back from that, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you. I think the actor does a great job. He's definitely one of those TV actor just standards. You see him in all sorts of different stuff, playing roles very similar to this. But I agree with you. I like the fact that, again, they tried to make it a little bit more gray, but they should have had someone else kill Bell if they wanted to keep him in that viewpoint,
Jay came in saying it should have been called the Webb Riots. I was kind of thinking that too, because Webb was the one who was actually on the media, who was actually doing the interviews and stuff. So you think like he would be more associated rather than Gabriel Bell. And plus, like someone talked about the Little Green Men episode where Nog is given a history book of Earth and he sees a picture of Gabriel Bell. It's like he goes to Quark's, it's like, doesn't that look like Commander Cisco? And Quark's just like, all humans look alike, which is kind of a funny joke, but it does make me wonder, like, how wouldn't they know that? I don't know, because he said he'd put Gabriel Bell's ID with the dead body, so should they think he looks like the dead body and not? I don't know.
Standard practice to burn the faces if you're going to do that. You burn the hands and the faces so you can't get identifying characteristics. Come on, man. This is impersonation 101. Jay Kamen, stay in the chat. You never saw Anakin kill a kid. It's implied. It doesn't matter, man. In the previous one, he already said that he wiped out the women and the kids and all the sand people. So this is just like...
But what do you think happened when they cut the scene? You think he like just put the lightsaber down and started dancing with them and like, oh, you can all go now? No, it's obvious what he did.
It's like the Daenerys thing, you know, she's burning people with dragons left or right. At the end, it's like, we're surprised she's burning people with dragons? Come on, man. That's Anakin's thing. Okay.
I do disagree with you about Daenerys, but that's another thing. That's getting to a sore topic. Game of Thrones season 8.
I'm just saying, some people have argued that. All I'm just saying is that, you know, people do things over and over again. We shouldn't be surprised if it happens one more time.
So I'm sorry. I'm kind of jumping back and forth between real life politics and the episode. Anyway, but I did want to jump back to real life politics a bit because I was reading about, and this is something I wanted to get into. Well, it's kind of related to the episode because I was reading about Eugene, Oregon, and there's certain, probably not the only city. I'm sure there's other cities that have designated areas for homeless people where they can sleep. Now, I don't think that is a bad idea. It depends on how it's implemented. And it seems like in Eugene's being implemented the correct way, where first of all, they're not being forced there. No one's corralling them and saying they must go. They have it as an option. And secondly, it's so they can have like clean toilets, access to showers, and stuff like that, where they wouldn't have access. So it's like helping them out more. So it's kind of similar to like a shelter system, but done in more of a wide open area. Also have access to social workers who can help them. So, and I feel like sometimes people see stuff like that and go, aha, sanctuary city. But because it seems like the idea of the sanctuary city in the episode was a good idea to begin with. That, oh, this is a place where we can help them. But then it got corrupted. It was underfunded. It became forced. They had no choice but to be there, and all these other issues. That is what made it bad. But I think the idea of having, now you could argue having a spot like that for homeless people to go could be for the purpose of getting them out of sight. But I think if that's not like... To me, that seems like if that's just a side effect of actually helping them, then I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, and I think you're right. That is kind of I think a better approach. Certainly, I would assume that the numbers of people in that camp are not particularly high, because I think that becomes really the issue. I think it becomes a number of how much can you manage. How many people are in an area?
So the one I was reading about, they have a limit.
Right.
And
to me, that
could bring up issues because then people will be vying for spots and whatnot and stuff like that. But that didn't seem to be the case in this particular place.
Well,
but I mean, you can see that could happen, though.
Any solution has to be, again, a multi-pronged, as you have to address the reasons of why are people being homeless in the first place and try and deal with those issues You
Yes.
can't just deal with the homeless issues if the feeder into that isn't, being stopped or dealt with. You got to attack it from a multi area. I think giving people an area to camp, if they so choose, where they could have access to sanitation, towards help, towards medical assistance, job assistance, whatever things that they might have or need. I think that's a great idea. But I think you're right. I think if that gets overcrowded and underfunded, then people just go, well, we got to close that off, or we can't do this. You could see how that would turn into a sanctuary city type kind of situation if it goes bad. But
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. If it's done correctly, like I think the main difference here is,
mhm,
or part of the signifier that if it's being done correctly, is that the homeless advocate groups support it.
right,
Because, for example, Governor Newsom passing that law, all the homeless advocate groups did not support it and were totally against it. Yeah, there are indicators of whether or not it's being done correctly that they need to listen to. And I could see the slippery slope argument that it could, lead to something bad like the sanctuary cities or sanctuary districts, but sanctuary city is something totally different. But sanctuary districts,
right.
but but I but I think that that's why you have to be vigilant and make sure it doesn't get corrupted.
Well, sure. And again, you have to deal with the other issues so that you have a control for that. So you, again, the tap feeding into homelessness isn't, fire hosing out on the street and then you're just down there
Yes,
putting band-aids on down the thing.
yes.
You
Well,
have to
see,
deal with getting people homes, making it affordable. People want to work, people want to have a place to live. Everybody, people want this stuff.
see,
They just
so this
need to,
gets
yeah.
sorry, this gets to a problem I had with the episode because I brought up before the BC saying jobs, you people want jobs. Well, Cisco's response to that was they'll find jobs. I'm like, that's actually not realistic. Like that's too of a simplist that doesn't address the complex issues. And the thing is that I'm thinking of is that homelessness, they're letting the cities deal with it. They're treating it like a local problem, but it's actually not. Even though it's maybe concentrated like 30% in California, it's still a national problem. Like the source of what's causing the homelessness is more of national policy, and they're treating it on a local level is just putting band-aids and not addressing the source, like you said.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, again, it's a much bigger thing, and again, this is only like one stage of it. Imagine if there is a depression or a recession or job numbers go down. I mean, right now we're dealing with all of these situations with relatively low unemployment, according to government statistics. Take all of that again, however you wish. But according to that, we still have what, a 4.3% unemployment right now, somewhere around there. If we have a recession, if there is some job situation, if there is some change and suddenly, you're getting mass deportations and companies are having issues and problems and workers and things are probleming down, you may have a huge increase in people that aren't employed, that do need to find jobs that are not there. And thus you're kind of in that situation. But you're right. I agree that just we'll find jobs. That's Look, I'm sure everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, but that's not just a thing that you can do.
Well, so that's I had an issue with the film Pursuit of Happiness. Did you ever see that movie?
Okay. Yes. I mean, yes, I did a
Will,
while ago,
Will
but yeah.
Smith. There was, for anyone watching who hasn't seen the movie, he in that movie it was a true life story of someone who was homeless, living in homeless shelters with his son, a father raising his son alone, and it was homeless, living in homeless shelters, who became eventually became like a rich Wall Street guy, and
Yeah.
the movie was about how he built himself up and through hard work, and the problem I have, and I'm sure that is a true story, but the thing is that's so rare and not indicative of the normal thing. It gives this false vision or false perspective of what, oh well, all you got to do is pull yourself up from the bootstraps and go out there and work hard, where this was a rare situation for this guy who was very skilled. He was in the military, he was used to hard work, he had all these skills that he could do, and he went out there and pushed himself, and the vast majority of people would not be able to do that.
There's a gas station just down the street from me. Guy got $1 billion lottery ticket. Won $1 billion just down the street from me.
Is this hypothetical? Or is this actually?
No, this really happened. This really happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, stuff like that happens, but it's not everybody's story. You're right. I mean, we as Americans love the pull ourselves up by a bootstrap story. We really do that. If we work hard and we focus, we can do that. There's like 15% of jobs that can maybe apply towards. And for the most part, for every one of those stories, you're not hearing about the 1,000 other stories of the people that did the exact same thing, but didn't achieve that success, that had that opportunity and worked hard and just didn't have it, or busted their butt and did everything right and weren't given that opportunity to be able to step back up.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the things that really frustrate, because I think it's a big American fallacy that by working hard and dedicating yourself, you can be successful. It helps. You could certainly maximize a lot of your potential that way. But I'm really good at what I do. And I've been doing it for more than 2 decades. And I still pay rent for a crappy house. And, my biggest thing is occasionally I'll go out and get tacos. And that's my big splurge for the week with my family. And I'm not going to own a home. And I've got no money for retirement. And I bust my butt as much as I can. And that's just the reality that I live at. There's no more bootstrapping that I can do that's going to change that. And that's just the reality, I think, for a lot of people.
Well, yeah, you can bootstrap all you want. A lot of people can just bootstrap all they want, but they're not going to get anywhere if the problem is like systemic. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And that's clearly, if you look at all the differences in statistics comparing now to like the 60s or whatever, you see how wage has not been keeping up with inflation at all. And so people relatively used to make way more money compared to their costs than they do now.
Oh, yeah. We used to talk. I mean, what was the thing? Dad went to work, was able to afford a home and put their kids through college, while mom stayed at home and took care of the kids and did all that. Single person income. You got a car, you got a house, you got kids in college. Okay. Now you have 2 people, the 2-person family that are renting a room with another 2-person family and sharing a car in between of them, and all their money goes to rent. And that's the today.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the episode actually did a really good job predicting the present.
It is sadly way too prescient for what our reality is, and maybe that should incite us to make changes.
Now, I'm not one to call myself optimistic. I'm usually actually rather cynical, but I am kind of optimistic seeing that more people are catching on to what you and I have been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I think even 10 years ago, more people were in denial about that, but it seems like the whole thing about trickle-down economics, I think the vast majority of Americans are finally seeing that it does not work. And so...
Well, I think that was maybe the biggest blessing, I will use that word lightly, with COVID. Because with so many people, you had to slow down and examine your life. Things shut down, jobs shut down. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people it did. And I think that period of time was like people suddenly realized they've been running on a hamster wheel all their lives, and they may be a little less interested in jumping back on that hamster wheel as soon as, we're given the green light. I think that people took a second look at their life and what they were working for and what they were doing. And I think we are now dealing with the kind of hangover of that experience of like, how do we integrate that into our lives? I think that's why there's a lot of issues that people are having right now. And I think if we can sort that out, we will definitely be in a much better place. But I think I think that's bringing into focus a reality that most people were just pushing away from their periphery just to survive. And now we really got to look at it. So, yeah, I agree.
No, absolutely. So a comment from Norman Buckhold in the chat that I absolutely love. Fox News coverage of the internet stories. Marxist terrorists make their demands on stolen internet channel. Yes, actually, I was thinking the same thing. I had forgot about that. But that's in this episode. They have all the people telling their stories, and they're like, that changes their minds. But I feel like in real life, you would have Fox News and all the propagandas making headlines like that. Oh, they're supporting the terrorists and they're giving the terrorists a voice. How dare they? Those Marxist terrorists. Yeah, that's right.
The mid-90s were still the very early days of Fox News. They didn't know what they were dealing with. They could not have predicted, even in their worst nightmares, the social media hellscape that we all live in. Again, like the time traveler to the 90s shows, please bring me back. Please bring. No, I'm kidding. I don't want to go back to the 90s. But
they
no,
didn't have smartphones.
They didn't have smartphones.
My phone broke, so I don't have a working phone today, and I just realized like how like it's my whole lifestyle. It's like how much I depend on having a phone. And so I could never go back to the 90s. I'd be like, there's no smartphones.
Slaves to our technology. No, we've been holding our phone on. I can't get a bar anywhere. Do I need to update my app? The app store is it's a blank wall. What's going on?
Or you get one of those like gigantic cell phones.
I was asking about cellular service. They just gave me a giant cord to plug in somewhere. Drag this around with you. Went in, bump, and it snapped right back in my face like a huge spring. Sorry. I don't know if anybody remember the giant spring cords.
Oh, yeah. No, I remember those cords. Absolutely. Well, so yeah, I think we're coming up at about an hour and a half. So I think this might be a good place to sort of leave things. I didn't know if you had any other final thoughts or last comments.
So I was listening and reached down and just unplugged my headset, so I couldn't hear anything there for a moment.
So I was just asking if you had any final thoughts before we depart.
No, again, it's this was a fun episode back in the day, and again, it's much more prescient now. It's one of those weird things about how accurate stuff is. We were all bummed that with Back to the Future we didn't get hoverboards by the time, and 3D had already come and gone at that point, so we did need Jaws 93.
Yeah.
But this is one of those where you're kind of expecting that we're going to make up something that is so much worse than what we could have, not totally out there, but beyond what we would expect that we would ever reach as our own dark future. And when we see our dark future staring right back to us in the present day, one, it gives power to writers and shows like this that they could find a story that would be, again, not only relevant, but very prescient 30 years later. But I think it gives us an opportunity to re-examine, like I said, those big questions of what is it that we as a society, what do we want to be? What is the minimum that we expect from ourselves? What is being an American citizen supposed to come with? How do we treat each other? And is that the story that we want to tell going forward? We got a lot of money, but we don't care about each other. It doesn't sound like a great story. We don't have as much money, but we all care for each other. That's every freaking American story that we all like. So why don't we just try to be a little bit more like that and look at these episodes and go, yeah, that's not the way that we want to be.
And it's the whole theme of Star Trek. Some people describe Star Trek as a utopian socialist society, which I don't think is incorrect. And it is interesting to contrast that with this dark vision of the future, and which was for them the future. It's today for us.
Yeah.
But the one thing I will say is that it's a good thing that we're not exactly the point that they were in this episode, that we don't have sanctuary districts where we lock people away, because that episode was depicting a dystopian future, and it's a bad thing that we're as close to it as we are. Like, if it would have been better if I'm sure what they were, when they were doing the episode, they were doing a warning and hoping that the future would not come this close to what they were depicting. So
sometimes it makes it has to be a near miss in order for it to work. I mean, climate change is kind of the same thing. We've been talking about it for decades and decades, and now we're seeing giant storms and, higher heat waves and cold waves, and everything's just more intense. And maybe now we're reminding, like, maybe we need to make some change. This is, again, one of those things. You're right. We're not there yet. And it's good that we're not there yet. But we're a lot closer than we should be, and that we should feel comfortable being, because it's very easy to see how we could go from where we are now to where this episode has us.
Exactly.
And that should motivate us to make changes. It shouldn't. If it scares us, that's great, but it should scare us into doing something about it and not just going, oh no, because that doesn't do any good.
If any time in the future going forward I watch the news and hear about a riot in San Francisco, and I see young Avery Brooks on the news, then I'll know that this episode just got the timing wrong.
There we go. There you go. That's what you can say.
So anyway, yes, thank you so much for joining. Thanks for everyone who joined in the chat. Had so many people. Thanks for the lively discussion. I'm sorry if I couldn't always interact, but we had Stephen, Norman, Jay Kamen, Alex, War Hero 99, and a few others pop in. Yeah, thanks so much for joining, and anyone watching the archives, thank you so much for joining as well. And of course, Darrin, thank you so much for joining. If you had any, I don't know if you're up to anything nowadays, but if you're just gonna want to give a shout out.
I did just do a discussion with Rob over from Smirking Gun Reviews this past week on my channel. It's the first video I've done for a little while. Basically just talking about some of the modern streaming shows, the IPs. I think we used Acolyte as sort of a springboard, and talking about some of the misses, some of the problems that we're having with the show from a real creative point, not from the, oh my God, girls were in it. Oh my God. There's a person of color out there. I hate all those, and I hate the fact that the show suffered with those types of attacks, but also that it had issues far beyond that. And I really wanted to talk about more of those issues, because I think it dealt with both Star Wars and Marvel, and a lot of the other big streaming shows. So it's really more of a discussion. We're not finding a whole lot of answers there. And both of those, Star Wars and Marvel, have stepped back from their streaming offerings because of the feedback and are reapproaching things. So, I mean, it may be all for moot anyway. Normally, Bobby Iger watches all of my stuff.
So
but he may not.
I watched that discussion as well. I thought it was a very interesting discussion. But something you just said about the people, who don't like the Acolyte because there's women in it or whatever. But the thing is, there's a straw man going around that also irritates me, that's related to that. They're like, oh, they call anyone sexist or racist who doesn't like the Acolyte. I'm like, that's such a bullshit straw man. I know plenty of people who don't like it, but not from that perspective. We're not saying everyone who doesn't like it is automatically that, but those people exist, and you're in denial if you're thinking that they don't. In fact, I feel like a lot of people who throw out that straw man probably are in that group of people and just pretending not to be.
Yeah. So no, we specifically threw that out, had that discussion from the top so that we could actually talk about areas of story structure and production value and lighting and all of that stuff that actually comes in. So that's on my channel if you want to check that out. Otherwise, I'm often here when this guy talks Star Trek stuff. So, you know.
One last thing I wanted to say about the Acolyte, that there was the avenue I actually really wanted to explore, is the one thing that I think it bodes poorly for television and entertainment going forward. To me, that and House of the Dragon season 2 are sort of indicative of how they're just they're not telling complete stories, and instead trying to leave things open so people, and this has been a problem with Marvel occasionally as well, where they're just trying to get people to come back for future installments, and I think that's getting out of control, and that is part of the issue with the Acolyte, because it didn't really tell a complete story, and now we'll never get the rest of the story because they didn't focus too much on telling one good story. Like, you need to focus, and this is all these failed franchises like the Dark Universe and shit. You got to focus on telling a good story first before you worry about trying to get people to come back for future shit.
Yes, 100%. Nothing to add on top of that. No, I completely agree. There's definite problems with their story structure, and we did get on that because I think that's part of the problems with their. It's not a movie. It's not a television series. It's a 6-part movie. It's like, no, it's not.
Yeah,
it's not just a movie cut up into pieces. And also, there's reasons why you have episodes, because it gives a structure that you can then follow and tell a story within. Otherwise, you get what this is, which is just everything all over the place. We're going to throw out half a dozen things and we'll see what we'll pick up later.
Yeah, like the best serialized shows that tell one story over several seasons, they have structured episodes, like Breaking Bad. They each have, even though it's telling one story, each episode is independent and structured. Lost, early seasons of Game of Thrones, like you still need those episodic structures.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, and I think you have to have a commitment to telling a story and a certain chunk of that story at a time. And I think there's a lot of moves that are very halfway done. Oh, let's see how this goes. Are people going to watch? We'll see if we're going to invest in it now. Let's see what we can begin with, and then we'll leave a tail so they can come back in. It's like a half-done tease to see if you can get audience members in, and you're not coming to the table with anything from that.
And I feel like Discovery was doing that too, a little bit.
Yeah, that's the one thing I like about Strange New Worlds, is because it may have a seasonal overarching story. Those episodic natures makes them be tight and forces them to tell. I think when you get too loosey-goosey and spread stuff too far out, there's less of a commitment to structure, and I think the story overall tends to suffer from that.
Absolutely. Anyway, so if you're finding my channel for the first time, my name's Mark. My channel is Enchantment of Eternity. I'm currently covering every episode of Star Trek in Star Trek The Next Generation Season 6 and Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 1. The two aired concurrently, so I'm reviewing them concurrently, which has been very interesting. It's been a different perspective watching them the way they've originally aired. And also, I'm here with Darrin and Alyssa once a month to count down my top 25 favorite episodes of Star Trek. Later this month will be my number 7. So anyway, be sure to check out my channel for that and anything else. And thanks a lot for joining. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.